He didn't bark at the bomb, he barked before anyone even knew it was there. When the judge confessed and collapsed from poison, it wasn't an officer who caught the killer, it was the dog. A battle-worn German shepherd with a torn ear, trained for war, now uncovering a truth no one else dared to see. This story isn't just about justice, it's about loyalty, memory, and a bond stronger than fear. Think you know what happens next? Stick around, drop your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe. We'd love to have you with us. The morning was unusually quiet. Washington, D.C. had that particular stillness that came right before the storm. The kind of silence that wasn't peace, but the breath held before the blow. Officer Elijah Brooks, tall, composed, and always a few thoughts deep, stepped out of his cruiser in the federal courthouse parking structure, his canine partner Zeke at his side. The German shepherd, black and tan and carved like a statue from war, moved with silent grace. But this morning, something was off. Elijah felt it in his gut, a cop's intuition honed from 2 tours in Iraq and 12 years on the force. He didn't say anything, not yet. He just watched Zeke closely. The garage echoed hollow under overhead fluorescence. Somewhere above, the first court session was starting. The clicking of Zeke's claws on concrete was the only sound. Elijah walked toward the central elevator bank, nodding at the security checkpoint. "Morning, Brooks," called one of the guards. Elijah raised 2 fingers in casual acknowledgement. Routine day. It was supposed to be. Zeke suddenly froze. The leash went taut, his shoulders locked, tail lowered, hackles raised. The growl started low, deep in the chest, a vibration Elijah could feel in the handle. The shepherd turned his head slowly toward a vehicle parked nearby. A black government-issued sedan, spotless, tinted windows rolled up, engine off. License plate Fed 1947. Registered to Judge Harris Wyndham. Rachel narrowed his eyes. "Zeke," he said quietly, tugging the leash. "Heel." Zeke didn't move. Instead, the dog began circling the rear of the car, nose lowered, body rigid, that same ominous growl rumbling low. Elijah's heartbeat ticked up. Zeke had been trained for narcotics, explosives, cadavers. He had never falsified. Not once in 7 years. The problem? This vehicle had already passed through level 1 inspection. No alarms, no anomalies. Cleared by courthouse security. But Zeke wasn't buying it, and neither was Elijah anymore. He stepped closer, unclipping a handheld scanner from his vest. He circled the car once, top to tail. Nothing. Flatline readings, no nitrates, no heat signatures. The car was clean, according to the machine, but the dog said otherwise. Elijah crouched, running a gloved hand along the undercarriage. Still nothing. He clicked the remote to lift the trunk using the judge's code standard protocol for law enforcement maintenance units. The trunk opened with a soft hydraulic hiss. Neatly packed briefcases, spare robe, a tin of mints. Nothing out of place. Nothing suspicious. Zeke barked sharply, startling Elijah into standing. The bark wasn't aggressive, it was urgent. Zeke was pawing the driver's side door now. Not the trunk, not the engine. The seats. "Are you telling me it's inside?" Elijah murmured. A passing courthouse guard raised an eyebrow. "Brooks, that car's already cleared." "Yeah," Elijah muttered. "By machines, not by instincts." Elijah had learned long ago sometimes it wasn't about what a device could detect. Sometimes it was about trusting the partner who'd saved your life more times than you could count. He signaled the guard. "I need probable cause to pop this open. Get me the marshal." "You serious?" "Dead serious." Within minutes, 2 more officers arrived and the judge's aide was paged. They unlocked the vehicle. Elijah opened the door, and there, hidden beneath the seat cushion in a heat-shielded pouch, was the device. Rectangular, wired, barely larger than a phone. But every hair on Elijah's arm rose as soon as he saw the glint of foil and the faint odor of ammonia. Explosives. Designed to detonate only when weight pressed the seat. Targeted, specific. Zeke sat at Elijah's feet, chest heaving, eyes locked on the now open door, as if waiting for the order that never came. One of the marshals exhaled sharply. Jesus Christ, if that man had sat down, he wouldn't have made it past reverse, Elijah said coldly. Sirens sounded. Bomb squad en route. Parking garage locked down. The courthouse is in alert mode. But Elijah stood there looking down at his partner. "Good boy," he whispered, voice tight. Zeke didn't wag his tail. unshaken, focused, like he knew this wasn't over, not yet. Something in the way that device had been hidden, its sophistication, its timing suggested it wasn't just a random act of violence. This was a message, and someone with power wanted Judge Wyndham's silence. Elijah had a sick feeling this wasn't the last time Zeke would be asked to step between death and justice. The bomb squad confirmed it 37 minutes after arrival. Not just a standard explosive, it was a shaped charge hidden beneath the seat padding, wired to a heat-sensitive trigger, the kind of device that wouldn't respond to simple vibrations or movement, but rather to one very specific condition: body heat. Someone had designed this to kill Judge Wyndham, not as a warning, not as a scare tactic, but as a precise, surgical execution. Elijah stood just outside the barricade tape, arms crossed, jaw clenched. It's not amateur, the tech told him. This kind of build, military-grade knowledge. Someone wanted this clean. Zeke sat beside Elijah, calm now but still watchful, his head tilting slightly toward the garage ceiling, ears twitching with every echo of activity. Elijah wasn't blinking. Any fingerprints? Trace DNA? The tech shook his head. Wipe. Whoever planted this did it with gloves. Left no skin oil, no residue. We'll still dust and swab, but I'm not holding my breath. Elijah nodded slowly, but his thoughts were already elsewhere. He'd seen this kind of sophistication once before during a raid in Mosul, when a similar Heath-hatered mine had torn apart a Humvee 3 feet in front of him. He remembered the silence that followed the blast more than the sound itself. Remembered watching a man he'd shared rations with vanish into air and blood. This wasn't some fringe fanatic or angry protester. This was the hand of someone trained. Later that afternoon, Elijah sat in a dimly lit surveillance room buried 2 floors beneath the courthouse. The room was cold, humming faintly with electricity, lined with monitors showing looping camera feeds from every corner of the courthouse complex. He asked to review footage from earlier that morning, specifically the hour when the judge's vehicle arrived. A technician pulled the files and scrubbed backward. "This is from 6:50 a.m., the tech said, pointing to a grainy timestamp. "Here's the entrance ramp. That's the judge's car." Elijah leaned closer. The sedan came into frame. It paused briefly at the entrance gate. The security arm lifted, and then it rolled forward toward the reserved spaces. But something felt off. "Pause it," Elijah said. "Now rewind 10 minutes. The tech obeyed. Cameras showed various vehicles entering. Janitors. Everything looked routine. But then, just as the judge's car should have been coming in, the screen went black. Elijah narrowed his eyes. "What is that?" The tech frowned. "That's not right." "What do you mean, not right?" "The feed drops completely." "Here, watch." He ran the footage again. At 6:56 a.m., the screen glitched for exactly 18 seconds. All feeds from that section of the garage went dark, only that section, no video. Just a black square. When the feed resumed, the judge's car was already parked. "You have any alerts from the system about that dropout?" Elijah asked. "Nothing flagged, no system log, it's like it never happened." Elijah stared at the screen, his voice low. "Someone spoofed your cameras, how?" "I don't know, but they knew when the judge would arrive, and they used that window to slip something under the seat." The tech tapped nervously at his keyboard. "There's only one way to do that. Someone accessed the system manually, locally. We're talking admin-level access. Who has that kind of clearance?" "2 people. Me and Carlos." Elijah didn't know Carlos personally, but he knew of him. Head of internal systems for the court building. 15 years of service. No red flags. But now his name meant something different. Elijah didn't speak for a moment. He watched Zeke through the glass, lying obediently near the door. The dog's eyes were open, tracking every sound in the hallway beyond. "Pull Carlos's access logs," Elijah said. "Find out where he was this morning." The tech hesitated. "We're not supposed to." The logs showed what Elijah expected. At 6:55 a.m., Carlos's ID badge accessed the main server room. He logged in remotely at 6:56. 6:57, the camera feeds dropped. At 6:58, he logged out. At 6:59, his ID was used to exit the server room, and Carlos returned to the security control center like nothing happened. Elijah stepped outside, grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, patch me through to internal affairs." "Copy that." and find Carlos Alvarez right now." An hour later they found Carlos. Not at his post, not in the cafeteria, but slumped behind the steering wheel of his own car in the side lot. Unconscious, pulse faint, a syringe on the passenger seat. EMS called it a near-fatal dose of insulin. Elijah stood beside the ambulance as medics worked on Carlos, pumping fluids, checking vitals. "Diabetic?" one of them asked. Elijah shook his head. "No, he's not." Foul play. It screamed foul play. Someone had used Carlos, his badge, his access, his terminal, and then tried to kill him to cover their tracks. The implication chilled Elijah's blood. This wasn't about fear. This wasn't a warning. This was clinical, calculated, professional. At 8:10 p.m., Elijah returned home. He lived in a narrow, modest apartment near Union Market. Nothing fancy, but quiet. Safe. Zeke padded in first, alert as always. Elijah poured himself a glass of water and sat heavily on the edge of the couch, running a hand down his face. "What are we walking into, Zeke?" The dog tilted his head. Outside the window, a thunderstorm gathered in the distance, clouds rolling like ink over the Capitol dome. Elijah could feel it again, that silence from earlier, now doubled. Like the world holding its breath once more. Something big was unraveling, and this was only the first strand. The rain had started by the time Elijah reached the precinct's internal intelligence division the next morning. Drops thudded against the windows like a ticking clock as he stepped inside the war room, 24 monitors humming with surveillance feeds, real-time traffic maps, encrypted comms. Zeke waited patiently at the threshold, his ears tilted toward the storm, but his gaze fixed on Elijah's every move. The room had that sterile tension of institutional order, coffee gone cold, paper stacks unfiled, and too many secrets hiding in the glow of screens. Elijah didn't speak right away. He was waiting for one person, Sergeant Marcus Dwyer, 38, ex-Navy, a brick wall of a man with a laugh that could shake a bar ceiling and a temper that once snapped a desk in two during a bad op. But more than anything, Marcus had been Elijah's best friend since Fort Benning. They had shared bunks and hellholes, stitched each other up in blackout tents, and stood side by side through years of battles, both foreign and domestic. Elijah trusted him more than anyone. Or at least he used to. Marcus entered a few minutes later, late by 13 seconds. His steps a little too stiff, his smile just a touch too forced. "Heard you stirred up some ghosts yesterday," he said, clapping Elijah on the shoulder with the easy familiarity of old times. Zeke sniffed out a conspiracy, more like he saved a federal judge from being turned into smoke. Elijah replied, watching Marcus's eyes. "You found a shaped charge under the seat." He triggered. "Damn." Marcus shook his head. "You think this goes high up?" "I think it goes deep," Elijah said. "Maybe deeper than anyone's ready to admit." He let the silence stretch, then added casually, "You were in the command center when Wyndham's car pulled in, right?" "Yeah," Marcus nodded, eyes flicking. "Nothing came up on the scan, everything looked clean. Why?" "Camera feeds dropped for 18 seconds. Someone disabled them from the main system, and the guy with clearance, Carlos, got himself nearly killed an hour later." Marcus stiffened. "Barely." But Elijah noticed. "You think Carlos did it?" Marcus asked, voice careful now. Elijah shook his head. "No, I think someone used him exactly what they were doing." That afternoon, Elijah started digging. Not through public records, not through open systems, but the gray layer, the in-between web where debt, favors, and silence traded hands faster than facts. It didn't take long to find it. Marcus had maxed out 3 credit cards, had liens on his condo, and had transferred his pension advance to a crypto holding based in the Cayman Islands. He was drowning, and someone had offered him air. Names started surfacing: quiet donors to local campaigns, consultancy firms with vague descriptions and deep pockets, private security contractors who were never listed on official ledgers but showed up on the fringes of federal courthouse upgrades. One name repeated: Dovetail Group, a shadow firm tied to judicial appointments, prison lobbying, and classified surveillance systems. Elijah had never seen it in a report, but he'd heard whispers, especially around certain political circles where pressure was never applied directly, only suggested. Telltale didn't pull triggers. They created situations where someone else felt compelled to. By midnight, Elijah sat in his kitchen, Zeke curled up at his feet while lines of code scrolled across his laptop screen. He had a trace open, one he initiated just hours ago when he tried to submit the bomb data to an FBI field agent in Quantico. The file didn't go through, no bounce back, no error message, just stopped. Like it was absorbed, vanished. That wasn't normal. That was surgical. He checked the packet trace again, rerouted through his proxy, then traced its last handshake before blackout, and then it hit him. The transmission terminated inside the courthouse building. Not outside, not in cyberspace. The exact endpoint was Room 4B, Judge Wyndham's chambers. Elijah's pulse ticked up. How the hell could that happen? He tapped again, re-verified IP location. Same result. The data rerouted through a secure node placed physically inside the building. That shouldn't have been possible, not without a custom backdoor, and not without cooperation. There was something in the judge's office capable of intercepting federal-grade transmissions, and it was eating them before they could breathe. Either Wyndham knew and allowed it, or someone planted it without his knowledge. Either way, Elijah needed to see the room, now. At 6:42 the next morning, he arrived early, badge clipped high, Zeke leashed and alert. The courthouse buzzed with half-recovered normalcy. Wyndham had canceled appearances but hadn't stepped down. Press called the incident an isolated threat, now neutralized. The world moved on, like it always did, too fast to look back. Elijah signed in under a pretext, internal inspection for canine route validation. He headed up the West Wing stairs instead of taking the elevator. Zeke moved like water beside him, silent, precise, always watching. The hall was empty. Elijah knocked once. No response. He knocked again, louder. Judge Wyndham, Officer Brooks, I need a moment. Still nothing. He reached for the door handle, locked. That wasn't unusual. But what was unusual was the faint electrical hum coming from the other side, and the fact that the keycard reader flashed red 3 times instead of the usual green before going dark. Zeke gave a soft, warning growl. Elijah crouched and placed his ear to the wood. No footsteps, no voice, just the static sizzle of electronics. He tapped his comms. Dispatch, I need eyes on Judge Wyndham's location. The reply came a moment later. He's not on site. Scheduled to testify downtown. Elijah nodded to himself, then stood and reached into his jacket, pulling out a thin override tool. Sorry, Your Honor, he muttered, but we need to know what you're hiding. He slid the tool through the card's slit, bypassed the primary lock, and felt the bolt disengage. The door creaked open, and inside the judge's office, the light was cold, clinical, filtered through half-closed blinds that cast lines like prison bars across the desk. Elijah moved cautiously, Zeke a dark shadow at his heel. The hum he'd heard from outside was louder now, electronic low hum. At the edge of the floor molding, nearly invisible to the naked eye, a small rectangular transmitter pulsed faintly, nestled between the wood panel and a baseboard vent. Elijah crouched, slid on a latex glove and carefully pried it loose. The device was military-grade, far too advanced for standard building security, with a transmitter node and packet filter that could reroute or erase digital signals within a 10-meter radius. That explained the corrupted FBI upload. Someone had turned the judge's chambers into a blind spot. He was about to photograph the unit when a voice barked behind him. Freeze! Hands where I can see them. Elijah didn't move, already recognizing the voice. Captain Renee Stokes, Internal Affairs. Put the device down, Officer Brooks, she said firmly, stepping into view with 2 agents behind her. Her eyes narrowed when she saw the transmitter in his hand. You're not cleared to be in here, and you're certainly not authorized to handle evidence from an ongoing federal investigation. Elijah stood slowly. Captain, someone planted this in the judge's office. It's blocking outgoing transmissions. That's how the bomb data was intercepted. Is that so? She said flatly. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've illegally entered a secured chamber and tampered with electronic evidence without chain of custody protocol. Come on, Renee, Elijah said, his voice lowering, measured but firm. You've been with this department 15 years. You know me. I know your record, she snapped. And I also know someone accessed your department credentials to bypass surveillance logs. The same credentials that were used to send a threatening email to Judge Wyndham last night. Elijah blinked. "You're talking about an anonymous message," she said, holding up a printout. "Untraceable origin, but the metadata matches your issued phone. It says, if you don't step down, the next bomb won't miss." "Care to explain that?" Elijah stared at her, breath slowing, stomach turning as the implication sank in. Someone was framing him precisely, efficiently, and viciously. And they were doing it from inside the same system he'd sworn to protect. "You didn't send that message," he said. "You can check the logins, the GPS. I was home with Zeke. I've got timestamps, doorcam footage. Save it." She cut him off. "You're officially suspended pending investigation. Badge gun." Now, he hesitated for only a second, then unhooked his badge and sidearm, placing them gently on the desk beside the humming transmitter. Zeke growled softly. "Easy, boy. You're not done." Stokes leaned in. "We better not be," she muttered, "because if you are, someone's going down with you." They escorted him out through the east stairwell, avoiding the lobby standard protocol for internal detainment. Zeke was led behind him on a separate leash by a handler Elijah didn't recognize. A younger cop with too much gel in his hair and not enough respect in his eyes. Elijah didn't speak during the elevator ride down. He kept his mind focused, tracking every beat of the takedown, how fast it had happened, how surgically someone had moved to discredit him. No leaks, no sloppiness. It wasn't just about making him look guilty. It was about cutting off his access, his credibility, and his allies all in one stroke. At the precinct holding room, he was placed in a small whitewashed cell with a bolted table and no clock. His phone was gone, his belt removed. The minutes stretched in silence. He tried to control his breathing, but his mind was spinning every clue he'd gathered, every warning Zeke had given, now tainted by a frame job that was building momentum like a freight train. He had maybe 24 hours before they made it official. Obstruction, evidence tampering, threat to a federal official, charges that could bury a career, maybe even a life. It wasn't until Agent Kessler from the Bureau arrived that things turned darker. Kessler was tall, smooth, and all teeth behind a pressed black suit. He laid out a printed report without a word. Elijah scanned it. The metadata showed access from Elijah's secure terminal at 2:47 a.m. His VPN keys, his IP, his keystrokes. "Only one problem," Elijah said. "I was asleep." "Your door cam says otherwise," Kessler replied. "Someone entered your apartment at 2:43 and left at 2:51. Elijah stared at the grainy still image. A hooded figure entered his building, moving like they knew every angle of the place. Someone had replicated his biometric profile. "This is a deep fake," he whispered. "They cloned my thumb." Kessler shrugged. "Maybe, but that's above my clearance. All I know is, it looks like you sent that threat, access to federal chamber, and now you're holding an unregistered military surveillance node. That's 3 felonies by breakfast." By the time the public defender arrived, some fresh grad named Winston with a briefcase too big for his skinny frame, Elijah knew the game had changed. Someone wasn't just trying to discredit him. They were preparing to eliminate him as a variable entirely. Winston looked nervous as he handed over a legal pad. "You've been made a person of interest in a federal-level conspiracy. If you talk now, we can cut some kind of deal." "He's no deal to be made," Elijah replied, "because I didn't do what they say. But I know someone who might have." Winston blinked. "You're saying you have a suspect?" "No," Elijah said, standing slowly. "I have a traitor, and I think I know where he's hiding." The cuffs clicked shut around Elijah's wrists with a kind of finality he wasn't used to. Not as a veteran, not as a cop. The agent walked him toward the transport van with quiet efficiency, one hand on Elijah's elbow, the other near his holster. Rain was coming down in a fine, chilling mist, slicking the street and amplifying every flashing light from the cruisers surrounding the station. Zeke, tethered behind him on a control leash held by a canine handler, let out a low whine that no one paid attention to, no one except Elijah, who heard it clearly as a signal not of fear but readiness. Elijah didn't know how long he had left before they buried him beneath a headline, but he knew one thing for certain: this night wouldn't end in a cell. As they passed the alley near the back of the lot, Elijah caught the glint of a maintenance scaffold barely a foot out of reach. He hesitated just half a step, and that's all it took. With a sharp pivot, he drove his shoulder into the agent's chest, twisted his bound wrists around the man's body, and used his momentum to slam them both into the wall. The agent stumbled, cursing, and Elijah kicked off the concrete, using the narrow support beam to vault over the chain fence. Zeke reacted in a blur, jerking the leash from the startled handler's grip and charging after his partner with unwavering precision. Behind them, shouts erupted, orders barked, sirens coming alive again, but Elijah was already 2 blocks deep in the maze of industrial alleys that spliced the outer edge of the city. He kept low, cutting across shipping yards and warehouse lots, knowing full well the perimeter would be sealed in minutes. Zeke stayed right on his flank, breathing hard but focused, checking corners, ears rotating with every footfall in the dark. Elijah's mind was scanning escape routes when Zeke suddenly broke stride, veering off toward an abandoned loading dock just north of Franklin Street, a place they'd cleared once years ago, a zone now forgotten. "Zeke?" Elijah's hissed, crouching behind a dumpster, but Zeke didn't come back. He lowered his body, nose pressed to the concrete, tail stiff. Something in his posture changed, alert, then rigid, then cautious. Elijah cursed under his breath and followed, vaulting a sagging chain-link fence to reach him. Zeke was circling a pile of discarded wood pallets, his snout twitching in a tight, controlled pattern. Elijah crouched beside him and caught it too, a faint, acrid scent he hadn't noticed in the rain, like burnt plastic mixed with metal oxide. He rubbed the edge of a damp sleeve across his face and leaned in. Beneath the pallets, someone had stuffed an oily tarp, and under that a chemical residue glowing faintly under the dim light from a broken street lamp. He reached out, touched the edge, and pulled back instantly. His fingers tingled. Keton. Explosive grade. Recently spilled. Not industrial storage field work. Elijah's heart kicked up. Someone had staged another device here. Maybe not just here. Maybe it had already been moved. "Good boy," Elijah whispered. Zeke didn't respond with pride, only vigilance, the way he always did when death was close. Suddenly a soft voice broke the silence. He smelled it too. Elijah whipped around, reaching instinctively for a gun that wasn't there. A figure emerged from the shadows behind a stack of rusted barrels. A woman, older, ragged, soaked from the rain, wrapped in a torn coat and plastic bags. Her hair hung in dirty strands across her face and her hands trembled, not from cold, but from something older and deeper. "Easy," Elijah said. "Who are you?" "Nobody," she said, looking at Zeke instead of him. "But I saw the man, the one who left the box under the car, and I saw your dog bark before anyone else did." Elijah took a step forward. "You were at the courthouse." She nodded slowly. "By the dumpsters. I sleep there when it's not too cold. I saw him, dressed like one of you, black boots, big duffel. He opened the judge's car like he had a key, planted it right." Elijah stared at her, every instinct telling him this should be impossible. But his gut, the same gut that trusted Zeke, told him she was telling the truth. "Why didn't you go to the police?" "I did," she replied bitterly. "But who listens to a woman with no address? They called me crazy, Iris, and told me to get off federal property." Zeke stepped closer to her without command, sniffed once, then sat down quietly beside her, his way of saying she wasn't a threat. Elijah felt something tighten in his chest. "Do you remember his face?" "I never forget faces," Iris said. "But I didn't see it. He wore a mask, one of those fabric ones like doctors wear." "What about his build, his voice?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Tall, strong, not young, not old. Moved like a soldier." Elijah's pulse spiked. Marcus, it fit. The access, the timing, the military gait. But it still didn't prove motive. "Did you see where he went after?" "North, toward the rail tracks." He walked calm, like he had time, like no one was watching. Elijah knew those tracks. There were blind zones in the city's security grid, areas with outdated infrastructure, overlapping jurisdictions, places where things disappeared. He looked back at Iris. "I need you to come with me." She shook her head violently. "I can't, they'll see me. They'll lock me up." "I won't let them," Elijah said firmly. "But I need you. You're the only one who saw him." She stared at him, uncertain, until Zeke gently nudged her elbow with his nose. Something passed between them. She nodded once. Elijah took off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders, then turned to the alley's far end. They had to move now. Every second wasted was a second closer to lockdown. The net was tightening, and whoever framed him wouldn't stop until everything he had, his badge, his name, maybe even Zeke, was wiped off the map. But now, finally, he had something they didn't. A witness, not just a thread of truth, but one the system had discarded. And Zeke, as always, was 2 steps ahead. Elijah led Iris through the back alleys of Capitol Hill, under the cover of fog and flickering lamplight, every turn chosen not for speed but for invisibility. Zeke moved beside them like a phantom, glancing behind at intervals, ears twitching toward distant sirens that faded in and out like the pulse of a sleeping city. They moved with a quiet urgency, not just because Elijah was a fugitive, but because he now carried something more dangerous than a badge or a weapon. He carried someone the system had tried to erase. By the time they reached the safe house, a rusted maintenance shed wedged between 2 condemned row homes, Elijah had already disabled the cameras and rerouted the municipal feed with a burner node. Inside, it smelled of copper, mildew, and lost time. He offered Iris a seat on a folded crate. She declined, lowering herself to the ground like it was second nature, wrapping the jacket tighter. Zeke lay beside her without command. Elijah crouched. "Talk to me," he said softly. "I know you saw him, but I need more than that if we're going to stop this." Iris didn't look at him. Instead, she stared at a small stain on the floor and said, "You know, they called me Iris Laramie once. Senior systems analyst, 8th floor. 32 years old, fully cleared." Elijah blinked. "Wait, you worked for the courts?" She nodded. 4 years. Code audits, compliance. I didn't dress like this back then. I had heels, Kozon nails, a badge that opened every door. She smiled bitterly. Until I opened one I shouldn't have. Elijah sat back slowly, his mind recalibrating. "What door?" "Case file repository," she said. "I wasn't even supposed to be on that node. I was doing routine metadata scrubs when I noticed the same checksum repeated across 3 different appellate case folders. That's not supposed to happen. Files might match in structure, sure. But checksums? Identical? Never. So I dug." She paused, watching him, "and I found something." Elijah felt the room grow colder. "Which case?" "One that vanished," she said, "perpessed by an emergency motion and quietly dismissed from the public index. Defendant, Charles E. Wilkes. Property fraud, racketeering, conspiracy." He walked away clean. Elijah frowned. "I know that name. That's the developer who bought half of Southeast before the rezoning bill passed." Iris nodded. "And the man who donated 6 figures to Wyndham's retirement fund." Elijah's chest tightened. "Are you telling me Wyndham was bribed?" "I'm telling you the file was scrubbed. Evidence buried, testimonies sealed, all within a 48-hour window. I reported the anomaly. 2 weeks later, HR told me my position had been restructured. The next morning, my access was gone. 2 days after that, my apartment was broken into, laptop stolen, my backup drive wiped clean, like I never existed." "Why didn't you go public?" Elijah asked. She laughed quietly. "I tried, but you can't go public when the public doesn't believe you. You're just another woman screaming conspiracy into the wind." I spiraled, lost my savings. Landlord changed the locks. It all happened so fast. Next thing I knew, I was sleeping behind the same courthouse I used to secure. Elijah was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "You kept something, didn't you?" Iris looked down at her coat, then reached inside, pulling out a small rusted tin. Inside it, wrapped in foil and duct tape, was a micro SSD. "This is the only thing I have left," she whispered. "I copied it to an air-gapped drive before they deleted my account. It's encrypted, but I memorized the key." Elijah took the drive gently, his fingers careful, reverent. "Can I run it?" She nodded. Using a modified terminal he kept offline for emergencies, Elijah booted up a sandboxed OS and loaded the drive. Zeke stood and approached, tail skilf, sensing the shift in tension. The terminal screen came alive with a list of data folders, each labeled with scrambled timestamps and file hashes. But one folder was different. It was named simply Dead Letter. Elijah opened it. Inside was a single audio file. He pressed play. A scratchy recording began, background noise of a private office. Then a voice, deep, familiar, weary. "Wyndham, I told you I'd sign it. I'm not backing out now. But this is the last time. I can't keep erasing these decisions. People are starting to ask questions. Another voice responded, muffled, distorted. You'll do what you're paid to do. You wanted out, we gave you a number, take it. Retire, disappear, or we make sure you get nothing. A pause. Then Wyndham again, softer, almost broken. If anything happens to my wife, then you'll have no reason left to hesitate. Elijah's jaw locked. The timeline fit. Wyndham had been complicit. Then he tried to stop. Someone threatened him, and when that didn't work, they planted a bomb. It wasn't just about silencing Iris or framing Elijah. This was bigger. A machine that crushed dissent then erased the evidence. And now somehow Elijah had stumbled into its center. He looked over at Iris. She was shaking. I held on to that file for 3 years, she whispered. Sometimes I thought I imagined it. But now they're killing people to keep it buried. Elijah nodded slowly. Not anymore. The next move had to be fast, surgical, and public. Elijah knew the clock wasn't just ticking, it was hemorrhaging. The recording Iris had hidden was explosive, but a file was worthless unless people saw it, unless the right hands held it before the wrong ones erased it forever. He couldn't go through official channels. The FBI wouldn't trust him. Internal Affairs had already made their move, and every precinct in the city had his face posted on their morning briefing boards. There was only one option left, independent press, ones who still took risks. He remembered a name, Mara Linton, war correspondent turned freelance investigator, the kind who wore Kevlar under a hoodie and carried truth like a loaded gun. She owed him a favor from Mosul, the kind you don't forget. Elijah reached out through a burner account attaching a cryptic message. Secure, meet, evidence, bring backup, no cop. The reply came 12 minutes later. Midnight, Anacostia Bridge, come alone. By the time the sky turned indigo over the city, Elijah had the SSD wrapped in an anti-Atacine sleeve, tucked inside a worn ammo pouch strapped to his belt. Zeke paced beside him, restless, eyes sharp and ears swiveling at every sound. Iris stayed behind, hidden in a crawlspace under a maintenance tunnel with enough food and blankets for 2 days. She didn't argue. She knew her part was over, and that if this step failed, it wouldn't just cost Elijah his name, it would cost them both their lives. The route to the bridge was threaded through back alleys, sewer passages, and rooftops, movements Elijah had once taught rookies when preparing for hostage rescues. Now he used them to outrun the badge he once wore. By 11:57 p.m., he was crouched beneath the northeast edge of the bridge, scanning the shadow. A black sedan idled 2 blocks away. A woman stepped out, tall, lean, red braid tucked under a canvas cap. Mara. She scanned the street, saw him, and nodded. Elijah emerged slowly, one hand raised, the other gripping Zeke's lead. No tails, he asked. If I had one, Mara replied. He's confused as hell right now. They met at the center of the bridge, just beyond the reach of surveillance cameras under a busted streetlight that flickered like a dying eye. Elijah handed her the pouch. Verify it, he said. She opened it, pulled out the SSD, plugged it into a field reader she wore on a chest rig. The screen blinked to life. One file, she murmured. Encrypted. Elijah gave her the passkey Iris had memorized. Mara typed it in. The audio loaded, the waveform spiked, and then wait, she said. Her brow furrowed. It's clipped. Elijah stepped forward. What do you mean? She held the reader up. There's a hard cut, the tail end gone. Someone used a data scalpel. This wasn't corrupted, it was edited. Precisely, not amateur work. Elijah's stomach turned. How? Only if someone knew the encryption, or had physical access to the original source. Or, she trailed off. Elijah stared at her. Or they knew you. Before he could respond, Zeke growled. Not a warning growl, a war growl. In the space of a single breath, everything slowed. Zeke lunged not toward Mara, but toward a nearby drain pipe, just as the first muzzle flash exploded from the shadows. The shot missed Elijah's neck by inches, tore through the edge of the bridge, and sparked off the concrete with a crack like thunder. Zeke hit the attacker mid-dash, claws scraping steel. The man grunted, twisted, elbowed the dog once, twice, but Zeke didn't let go. Elijah dove forward, tackled the figure to the ground, and ripped the weapon free. Another shot fired into the air. Screams erupted in the distance. Then silence. Zeke stood over the downed shooter, chest heaving, eyes glowing with the same fire Elijah had seen on the battlefield. Blood stained the attacker's forearms, deep punctures from Zeke's bite. Elijah pinned the man, ripped off his hood. For a second, he froze, to light as someone he recognized. Colonel Thomas Vance, retired commanding children. "You've got to be kidding me," Elijah muttered. "You?" Vance spit blood, smirking. "You were always too righteous, Brooks. That's why you never got promoted. You tried to kill a federal judge." "No," Vance coughed. "I tried to clean up after one." "The audio, what was cut?" Elijah demanded. "What was missing?" Vance didn't answer. He looked at Mara, then at the drive in her hand. "That file isn't the real problem, you are." Blue lights flooded the end of the bridge. Multiple cruisers, feds. Someone had tipped them off. Mara's eyes went wide. "We have to move," she whispered. Elijah turned to Zeke. The dog had already started pulling at his sleeve. Elijah didn't wait for the lights to close in. He yanked Mara behind the rusted support beam, grabbed Zeke's collar and vaulted over the edge of the bridge into the marshy runoff below. They landed hard in the wet reeds, muddy water splashing to their waists, cold slicing into skin like razor wire. Mara hissed a breath through clenched teeth, but followed without protest. Zeke hit the ground running beside them, leading the sprint through undergrowth as red and blue lights blurred above. Elijah knew every exit point within 10 blocks of the Anacostia corridor, but none of them would matter if the manhunt turned federal. As they moved, Mara muttered, "You recognized him." Elijah didn't answer at first. His lungs burned. The air stung. Every step forward felt like dragging the ghosts of the past up from the soil. Finally, he said, "Vance was our CO, Iraq, 2007. They reached a rusted hatch behind a maintenance shed. Elijah kicked it open. The tunnel inside smelled of rust and gasoline. As they climbed down the ladder, Mara pressed, "What happened out there?" Elijah looked at her with the kind of stare that stripped a decade off your life. 6 of us were assigned to secure a convoy route. We received intel about a potential IED hotspot. Vance rerouted us last minute. Claimed new orders. But no one verified it. He insisted. Said it came from high command. Elijah's voice lowered. Halfway down that trail, the first Humvee vaporized. Secondary went up next. I was in the third. Dislocated shoulder. Banged up ribs. But I crawled out. There was screaming, fire. Zay pulled me from under the axe. Mara frowned. Zeke was there? Elijah nodded slowly. He wasn't mine back then. He belonged to Staff Sergeant Callahan. They were point on that run. Zeke was trained for IED detection. Probably the best damn dog in the whole canine rotation. But that day, something was off. He kept barking before the rear route. Zeke survived, lost part of his right ear to the blast, carried Callahan's tags in his mouth when they found him 2 hours later. No other survivors. Just him. And me. Mara stared, realization dawning. Can you think Vance planned it? Not then, Elijah said. But weeks later, word leaked that our unit's death triggered a bonus clause. Combat loss payout from a private contractor. Vance's name showed up in the disbursement logs, undisclosed payment through a shelf. Mara went pale. The same name tied to courthouse systems. Exactly. Elijah sat down on the tunnel bench, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a laminated photo worn from years of being folded and unfolded. It showed a young Zeke, still scarred, with his right ear jagged at the top, sitting beside a burned-out Humvee under a blood-orange sky. This, Elijah said, is why I trust the dog more than the badge. Zeke patted over, settled his weight gently against Elijah's leg. The incident, Elijah continued, Zeke was scheduled for decommissioning. Peak Tuesday, they said. Too reactive, unfit for duty, but I pulled strings, called in favors. Took him home. Mara stared at the photo, at the dog who looked like a monument carved from pain and loyalty. And Vance, she asked. He got promoted, retired with full honors, became a consultant for Dovetail, and now he's hunting anyone who knows the truth. They moved again just before dawn, slipping through the back end of the sewer path into a maintenance corridor that led under the abandoned train yard. Zeke moved ahead, tail steady, tracking noise with surgical alertness. Elijah guided Mara into a storage nook behind a panel of old junction boxes. We'll rest here, he said, for an hour, then we move again. Mara leaned against the wall, exhausted. Elijah didn't sit. His mind was spiraling. Why cut the recording? What was in the missing 30 seconds? The word could be so damning that even murder was preferable. Mara answered the thought without hearing it. You said the full payment went to Vance, but what if it didn't end there? Elijah looked over. Meaning? Meaning someone else has been using Dovetail's operations to buy silence, to rewrite justice. Wyndham wasn't the only judge they got to. Maybe not even the highest. I'm saying, Mara said, this isn't about one file. This is about a system built on erasure. Just then Zeke growled. A low, throaty rumble, not fear, but the kind that meant someone was coming. At exactly 10 o'clock a.m., the hearing room inside the district justice building was locked down tighter than a federal black site. Everyone had been searched twice, phones confiscated, entry logs triple-checked. Armed marshals lined the walls in dark uniforms, their hands resting quietly on holstered sidearms. In the center of it all sat Judge Wyndham, unusually pale but composed, a glass of water beside him trembling slightly each time his hand returned to the table. The moment had arrived, not for Elijah, not for Iris, not even for Mara, but for the man who had become a symbol of a collapsing system now forced into the light. Elijah and Mara sat in the back, barely acknowledged by officials who still saw them as dangerous variables. Zeke, however, had been permitted in under exceptional grounds as an evidentiary K-9, a technicality Elijah had pushed for hours prior. Now the German shepherd lay at his handler's feet, calm but alert, his eyes never straying from the front of the room. The room hushed as Wyndham adjusted the microphone. His voice was hoarse. I've served this bench for 23 years, he began, and in that time, I have made rulings that shaped lives, defined careers, even cost people their freedom. But today I sit before you not as a judge, but as a man who has failed. The chamber stirred. 3 years ago, I allowed a case to be manipulated under pressure from political entities tied to a firm called Dovetail Group. I accepted a payout I never declared. I altered the docket, I sealed evidence. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Reporters scribbled furiously. Elijah leaned forward. Wyndham continued, and when I tried to leave that circle of corruption, I was warned. When I resisted, they tried to kill me. He reached for the glass of water, took a sip, and then his hand twitched. It was subtle at first, an awkward motion, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. Then his fingers curled spasmodically, knocking over the glass. The bailiff jumped forward. Your Honor? Wyndham clutched his throat, wheezing, pupils dilating. His body seized. Elijah shot to his feet, but Zeke was already moving. The shepherd exploded into motion. Nose low, tail stiff, every hair along his spine rigid as steel wire. He ignored Wyndham completely, bypassed the panicked bailiffs, and lunged toward the counsel table. There, seated with a folder of neatly printed documents and an expensive fountain pen, was Assistant District Attorney Jacob Thorne. Zeke snarled, leaping over the barrier, teeth bared, not attacking but locking onto the stainless steel water bottle beside Thorne's right hand. The lid popped loose from the force of the impact. The room stilled as the unmistakable chemical sting of bitter almonds filled the air. Cyanide. Thorne froze. His eyes darted toward the exit, but Elijah was already there. Don't, he said, voice low. You won't make it 2 steps. Thorne looked at the dog, then at the toppled bottle. His composure shattered in an instant. It wasn't supposed to kill him, he muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Just make him incoherent. Rambling, useless. Elijah stepped closer. You poisoned a federal judge? Protected the system, Thorne snapped. He was going off script. We were handling it quietly. You brought this mess back into the open. No, Elijah said, his voice like granite. You buried it. I'm just here to dig it back up. 2 marshals grabbed Thorne, wrenching his arms behind his back. The room spiraled into chaos as AMTZs swarmed the bench where Wyndham lay unconscious, an oxygen mask over his face, his vitals in rapid decline. Elijah stepped back, his mind spinning. Thorne wasn't just complicit, he was embedded. If someone as high as an assistant DA was taking orders from DuckTales and behavior for Delaware was better than behavior for Delaware. This was coordinated. Zeke returned to Elijah's side, muzzle streaked with sweat but eyes razor sharp. He didn't bark. He never did. Elijah knelt and stroked the patch of rough fur behind his ears, where the scar still marked the spot from a rock. A forever wound now burning with new meaning. "You saw it before any of us," Elijah whispered, "and you never forgot." The headlines hit every screen by sunset. Federal judge admits to conspiracy. ADA arrested in cyanide plot. Whistleblower evidence uncovers Docktail corruption ring. It wasn't just local anymore. Washington shook. Investigations were launched into dozens of past cases. Sealed files were reopened, and internal departments across the judicial system went into full damage control. Journalists tracked names and money trails leading back over a decade. Elijah didn't give interviews. He didn't attend the press conference held by the Department of Justice. He didn't shake hands or smile for the cameras. He simply stood at the top of the courthouse steps with Zeke at his side, watched the media frenzy from behind dark sunglasses, and walked away without a word. Captain Stokes called him that night, offered reinstatement with honors, a permanent desk, full immunity, and even a commendation. He thanked her and declined. "I'm not going back," he said quietly. "I didn't survive a war to sit in a room full of people who ignored one here." She didn't argue. She understood. Mara published the story with every receipt, every file, every word of the audio recording that Iris had saved. Wyndham, still recovering in guarded care, issued a full confession. Thorne's trial was expedited. Ducktail's assets were frozen, but the damage wasn't undone. It never is. Iris, for the first time in years, had a name again. Not a number on a shelter log, but a full reinstatement of her identity. She chose not to return to her old life. Instead, she took a small settlement and started teaching coding in a community center where kids wrote games to understand the world they couldn't always escape. Elijah visited once. Just once. She hugged Zeke longer than she hugged him. As for Elijah, he disappeared from the grid. Sold the apartment, closed every account, bought a used truck, retrofitted it for long drives, and pointed south. He drove through the Carolinas, through Tennessee, through old forests and empty highways with Zeke in the passenger seat, always watching. Sometimes they slept under bridges, sometimes in truck stops, sometimes not at all. He didn't need peace, he just needed distance. From war, from courts, from everything that still echoed in the dark corners of his mind. He still had the photo of Zeke near the Humvee, the one with the torn ear. He kept it in the glove compartment, just above a service pistol he hadn't drawn since the bridge. Years passed. Seasons changed without fanfare. Elijah's beard grayed. Zeke's pace slowed. No longer the bullet-fast soldier he once was. Zeke now moved with the slow pride of a veteran, each step deliberate, each gaze heavier with memory. Elijah talked less, but he listened more. And Zeke always understood, even in silence. Then, one autumn morning, the truck pulled into a quiet town near the Georgia border. Not for any reason, just because the sky looked clearer there. Elijah stepped out and looked at the small sheriff's station that stood by a grove of old trees, their leaves turning amber. A boy was standing by the front steps, waiting, maybe for a parent, maybe for something else entirely. He had wild hair, scraped knees, and fire in his eyes, the kind Elijah had once carried but had long since buried. The kid watched Zeke curiously. Elijah didn't speak to him, not yet. 3 years later, the same station had new paint, a new badge behind the desk, and a new cruiser parked out front. And one afternoon, under a soft sun, the passenger door of that cruiser opened. A boy, now a little older, steadier, with a badge freshly clipped to his cadet uniform, stepped out. His boots were too clean, but his eyes were sharper now. He held a leash in one hand, weathered leather frayed from years of wear. At the end of it walked Zeke, older now, his muzzle grayed, one eye cloudier than before. But his head was held high, his posture unchanged. He still moved like he remembered every blast, every bullet, every lie. He walked with dignity. He walked like a warrior. The boy stood tall beside him, eyes scanning the street like he'd been trained. He was Elijah's son, not by blood but by everything else that mattered. A kid found on a back road, hungry and alone, once too angry to speak. Elijah had taken him in, fed him, taught him to aim a compass at something more than rage. And now the world turned full circle. Zeke sat beside the boy, looking up once as if to ask, "Ready?" And the boy nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. We've got this. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next cinematic tale we bring to life. Which plot twist hit you the hardest? And what would you have done if you were in Elijah's place? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. We read every single one,